Good evening. My name is Kim Sayat, and I want to welcome you to the Smithsonian and the National Portrait Gallery. When Congress founded the museum, it was with the understanding that we would collect, display, and tell the stories of individuals who have made a major contribution to US history and culture. And as we all know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has not only made a major impact on this country, but one that has truly served to inspire generations of people to fight for the things that they care about, but in such a way that others would like to join the cause. In recognition of her remarkable impact on our nation, I'm proud to say that the Portrait Gallery has 4 portraits by Justice Ginsburg in the collection, one of which is part of a group portrait of the first 4 women to the court, painted by Nelson Shanks, that he titled The 4 Justices, and that we like to call the Supremes. There is a popular adage that well-behaved women rarely make history, and the same certainly applies to portraiture. Before the advent of photography, portraiture favoured those who could vote, white men who owned land. Over time, more women would have their portraits made, but truthfully, still very few. Still today, only about 25% of the collection depicts women. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was extraordinary because she did not only create his story, history, but also her story. She inspired other women to fight for their independence, demonstrate their intelligence, and question the status quo, to be, well, badly behaved or notorious. The kind of woman who was noticed and seen literally making positive change. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce the Chancellor of the Smithsonian and another Supreme, the Honourable Chief Justice of the United States, John G. Roberts, to give opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I want to begin by thanking Director Kim Sayat for hosting this magnificent and meaningful event here at the National Portrait Gallery. I also want to express my appreciation to USPS Board of Governors Chairman Roman Martinez for his important role in today's official stamp dedication. And I do want to acknowledge in the audience my colleague, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and my retired colleague, Justice Kennedy. Where are you? I am sure there will be no dissenting opinions from my remarks. There was once on the Supreme Court a New Yorker so recognizable that the Postal Service delivered an envelope to that person addressed only by a drawing of the justice. I am referring, of course, to the time 88 years ago when Charles Evans Hughes was Chief Justice of the United States. The envelope, which we have kept in our curator's office, is adorned with nothing more than a pencil drawing of Hughes, a January 21, 1935 postmark from New York City, a 3-cent stamp, and the words Washington, D.C. scrawled across the bottom. The Postal Service knows an icon when it sees one. Perhaps that delivery was the inspiration for a stamp issue honoring Hughes in 1962 on the centenary of his birth. Now, everyone here knows that the court has had another New Yorker so iconic that mail could have been delivered to her by a mere sketch of her appearance. Indeed, perhaps even a sketch of just her signature collar. And now a new stamp will honor this outstanding American, an eminent jurist who gave so much to our country as scholar, teacher, lawyer, judge, and justice. In the pantheon of philately honored justices, she joins a distinguished membership including not just Hughes, but also Chief Justices John Marshall and John Jay, and Associate Justices Oliver Wendell Holmes, Louis Brandeis, Thurgood Marshall, to name a few. William Howard Taft has a stamp too, but that honors him for that other job he held. It is a fitting moment for this ceremony too. 30 years ago yesterday, the Supreme Court held a ceremonial investiture welcoming Justice Ginsburg to the court. 30 years ago this week, she sat as a member of the court for the first time when it convened by law for a new term on the first Monday in October. Now, as a consequence of that same law, however, I am due back on the bench tomorrow morning, and so in just a moment I will turn the program over to the Postal Service. But I couldn't miss this occasion. I want to recognize the presence of the Justices' children, Jane and Jim Ginsburg, who will always be part of the Supreme Court family. As Chancellor of the Smithsonian, I am pleased to welcome everyone here to the National Portrait Gallery. As Chief Justice and on behalf of the Court, I thank the Postal Service for honoring our late distinguished colleague and dear friend. Thank you very much and enjoy the program.
I now have the distinct honor to introduce your MC for the evening. Tom is an anchor at Fox 5 in the morning on Sundays, the host of the 5 on the Hill, and a reporter for WTTG-TV in Washington, D.C. Please welcome your MC for this evening, Mr. Tom Fitzgerald.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? We have a special evening for you ahead, and it's just a wonderful evening to be here. Thank you so much, everyone. It is my sincere, humble honor to be serving as your Master of Ceremonies this evening as we mark this historic occasion, the official dedication of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Commemorative Forever Stamp. We have a wonderful program for you tonight, even more wonderful than what you've already witnessed tonight. But first, a word about cell phones. They're wonderful modern tools of science. However, they can be a bit distracting in official Washington events like this one or even opera performances. So we ask, take a moment, just silence them. Don't turn them off, though, because you're going to need them. The Postal Service this evening would like you to use your phone to hashtag this evening, hashtag RBG stamp and Ruth Bader Ginsburg stamp, and use that on any social media post that you make this evening. At this time, we would like all of you to rise for the presentation of the colors by the United States Postal Service's Postal Police Honor Guard and the national anthem performed by Jonathan Patton from the Washington National Opera.
Say, can
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please take your seats, everyone. Let's give a big round of thanks to both Jonathan Patton and the Postal Service Police Honor Guard for that wonderful. We are most fortunate this evening to have several dignitaries and guests of honor in this audience here tonight. We would like to acknowledge them at this time, and if you are able to stand and wave as I call your name, we'd appreciate that. Please hold your applause till the end, as they say. We would like to acknowledge the partners that made this evening possible tonight: the United States Postal Service, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg family, the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. We also have with us tonight the Honorable Sonia Sotomayor, the United States Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, from the United States Postal Service Board of Governors, the Honorable Anton Hajar, the Honorable Amber McReynolds, the Honorable Dan Tangerlini, and we would also like to acknowledge the many members of Congress we have with us this evening who have taken the time to be with us tonight. We, of course, have the Ginsburg family with us this evening as well, and that includes Justice Ginsburg's daughter and son, Jane Ginsburg, and James Ginsburg. We also have Philip Bergenham, who is the photographer of the stamp you were about to see, Ethel Kessler, who is the art director and the designer for this stamp, and Antonia Alcala, who is the USPS art director. Thanks to all of you. It means so much to everyone that you are here tonight to join in this very special event, and we appreciate your support. But now, to the business at hand. This is the moment you have been waiting for this evening, the dedication of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Commemorative Forever Stamp. To do the honors tonight, we have Roman Martinez, the chairman of the Postal Service Board of Governors, which is comparable to the board of directors of a corporation. They direct the organization's expenditures, the long-range planning and policies, and as you can imagine, it is an enormous task. Governor Martinez also chairs the board's audit and finance committees. He serves on the election mail committee as well, and it is our honor tonight to present the Honorable Roman Martinez.
Good evening. I'm glad he got that right. Some people call me the horrible Roman Martinez, but that's another story. Good evening. What an honor to be here tonight, representing over 630,000 women and men of the Postal Service. First of all, I'd like to thank the National Portrait Gallery for providing this magnificent space for such a great event. Thank you. And I also want to thank the postal workers who put up these events year-round, and they do a great job. They bring it to life. You guys are terrific. One of the privileges of being chairman of the board, perhaps the only one, is that I get first pick for the first day of issue events like this. And this one was very special to me. One, we're honoring a great American and a great individual, but we're also in effect honoring the Supreme Court, which I hold in high esteem. It plays a very important role upholding the Constitution and the rule of law. I'm the only speaker tonight who probably does not know, or who did not know, Justice Ginsburg, but I saw her in action many times at the court. I was always impressed by her quiet but firm demeanor, her sharp questions, and I saw her in action many times during the last several years. Beyond the court, her personality, spirit, and presence are widely held by many Americans. A lot has been said about her, but to me, the one particular thing that I admire was her ability to persevere, her ability to fight for what she believed in, but to do it so in a civil way. As she said, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And her famous friendship with Justice Scalia, another great American, is a testament to that principle. In a time of sharp divisions in our country, we need more of that Ginsburg spirit. And as we Americans use her forever stamp, let us hope forever remember what binds us together as a nation. I am often asked about the selection process to be on a stamp. I'll just say a few words on that. We're older than the United States. We were established in 1775 by the Second Continental Congress. Benjamin Franklin was our first Postmaster General. He had more hair than Postmaster General DeJoy, but he was just as efficient. And in 1787, it was the only federal agency mentioned by name in the Constitution. But it was only until 1847, 75 years later, that the Congress authorized the issuance of stamps. And that year, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin were so honored. Well, stamps were initially introduced to provide revenue to pay for Postal Service. Over the years, it has become really a history of our nation in visual form. Today, a person has to be deceased 3 years before he or she is considered for a stamp. In our nation's history, we've had 103 Supreme Court justices that have passed away. But before today, as you heard from the chief, only 14 have been honored on a stamp. One of them was Charles Evans Hughes, which he mentioned, Chief Justice from 1930 to 1941. And on a postal family note, his great-granddaughter is here tonight, Sandra, and she's married to our Vice Chairman of the Board, Anton Hajar. Every year, the Postal Service receives over 20,000 suggestions for new subjects to be honored. From there, the Citizens Stamp Advisory Committee, made up of 11 citizens, individuals from varied backgrounds, makes recommendations to the Postmaster General. Stamps are to feature subjects that have made an extraordinary and enduring contribution to American life, history, or culture. The official Postal Service release announced this event as celebrating Justice Ginsburg's groundbreaking contributions to justice, gender equality, and the rule of law. She certainly contributed all of that and much more to the fabric of our nation. We're very proud to be issuing a stamp on her honor. Before we ask my fellow participants to unveil the stamp with me up here, I'd like to recognize and thank 3 individuals who contributed to this creation. Our director, Ethel Kessler, I think she's here. Michael Diaz, who painted the portrait, and Ralph Birmingham, on whose photograph the portrait was based. As you will see, it's a beautiful work of art. Now it gives me great pleasure to invite Justice Ginsburg's children, Jane and James, to join me here, as well as the other participants, to unveil the stamp. And I invite Postmaster General, too, to come up. Justice Sotomayor, if you'd like to join us. Justice Kennedy, would you like to join us, too?
Thank you so much, Governor Martinez, and thank everyone who just joined us in that incredible moment. A round of applause for everyone. Don't get too comfortable. Our next speaker is so well known in this town that, as they say, she needs no introduction, but yet she is going to get one anyway. She is the National Public Radio Legal Affairs correspondent whose coverage of the Supreme Court and legal affairs have won widespread recognition, including, and this is a long list, the George Peabody Award, the Broadcaster of the Year, the Saul Tayshoff Award for Excellence in Broadcasting for the National Press Foundation. She has been honored 7 times by the American Bar Association for her continued excellence in legal reporting, and she is the recipient of more than 24 honorary degrees. She is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Dinners with Ruth, a memoir of power and friendships. Of course, I could be talking about nobody else in this town but the legendary Nina Totenberg.
Legendary means old. It's really wonderful to be here today. It's fitting that we are assembled to celebrate Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her stamp, because RBG quite simply changed the way the world is for American women. And she did that even before she became a judge. For more than a decade, until her first judicial appointment, she led the fight in the courts for gender equality. When she began her legal crusade, women were treated, I know this is hard to believe for many in this audience, women at that time were treated by law differently from men. Hundreds of state and federal laws restricted what women could do, barring them from all manner of jobs, rights, even jury service. But by the time she became a judge in 1980, she had quite literally wrought a revolution. The strategy that she devised as an advocate was characteristically cautious, precise, and single-mindedly aimed at one goal: winning. Knowing that she had to persuade male establishment-oriented judges, she often picked male plaintiffs to illustrate how discrimination against women can also harm men. In one of her earlier cases, she represented a man whose wife, the principal breadwinner, died in childbirth. The husband sought survivor's benefits to care for his child. But under the then existing Social Security law, only widows, not widowers, were entitled to collect survivor's benefits. And so she told the justices that this law, and I can almost hear her voice in my head, quote, operates to the disadvantage of female workers, their surviving spouses, and their children. The court would ultimately agree. She won a lot of victories as a justice, too. She was a master at holding a close majority together. But as the court grew more and more conservative, her dissents grew more and more pungent. My personal favorite came in 2013, when the court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, contending that times had changed and the law was no longer needed. Justice Ginsburg, in dissent, said that throwing out the law because it was working was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. She was an unlikely pioneer, a diminutive and shy woman whose soft voice belied a spine of steel. And by the time she was in her late 80s, she was, to her astonishment, and I would have to say, and her pleasure, something of a rock star to women and men of all ages. She was the subject of 2 movies, merchandise galore featuring her notorious RBG moniker, a Time magazine cover, and regular Saturday Night Live sketches that invariably ended with Kate McKinnon, the Ginsburg imitator, declaring, "And that's a Ginsburg." Over her 87 years, she was a friend to hundreds and hundreds of people from all walks of life. The Supreme Court IT guy charged with teaching her how to use a computer found that from time to time the justice, who knew he was an opera fan, would invite him to go to a performance with her. Or there was the law clerk, who had no idea that the justice knew of his trouble finding a daycare spot for his toddler, until the day he accompanied her to a speech at Georgetown University. And afterwards, in the elevator, RBG asked her escorts, "Where is the daycare center?" The answer was the basement, where RBG promptly led the whole entourage, announcing when she got there, "Hello, I'm Justice Ginsburg. My clerk, Joe, is looking for a daycare spot for his son, Simon. We'd like a tour." Problem solved. I could never get over how much emotional peripheral vision Ruth had. She always seemed to know when to write, when to call, and her actions were so often above and beyond the call of duty. When cancer reared its ugly head again in 2018, she leaned on my surgeon husband, David, for advice, but I remained in the dark. On the day of the surgery, just hours after she was wheeled out of the OR, she called me from the ICU. She was calling, she said, because she wanted me to know why she had forbidden David to tell me anything about what was going on. "I didn't want you to be trapped between your friendship for me and your obligations as a journalist," she said. The reach of her personal decency extended to all manner of folks, important and unimportant. For decades, she corresponded with Lois Severin after the death of Severin's husband, who had been a friend of the Ginsburgs at Cornell. After the initial condolence note, RBG would periodically sent cards and chatty notes, often accompanied by a speech she'd given or an article of interest. And Lois? Well, Lois began sending crocheted lacy gloves to Ruth, gloves that, along with similar ones that she bought at Bergdorf's, would be worn by the justice to hide the dark bruise marks on her hands from cancer treatments. Over the years, I interviewed the justice dozens and dozens of times, and in one of our last, she remained optimistic even though she was, again, fighting cancer. I do think I was born under a very bright star, she said with a smile. Because if you think about it, if you think about my life, I get out of law school. I have top grades. No law firm in the city of New York will hire me. I end up teaching, and it gave me time to devote to the movement for evening out the rights of women and men. It was that legal crusade, of course, that led to her appointment to the United States Supreme Court and to this forever postage stamp this evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nina. That was fantastic. Nina Totenberg, everyone. We are pleased to introduce this evening our next speaker who comes to from the Postal Service. Lori Dim is an executive in their law department, and her practice has included employment, government contracts, real estate law. However, she knew Justice Ginsburg through the world of opera. Everyone, please give a big welcome tonight to Lori Dim.
I am thrilled to participate in this celebration because of my long-standing connection with Justice Ginsburg as a fellow opera lover. I first met her many years ago through another opera fan. We were at a movie theater to watch the Saturday matinee performance of the New York Metropolitan Opera, which was being transmitted live via satellite. It soon became a regular occurrence, and we saw quite a few of them over the years. As you might imagine, it was quite an experience attending these performances with Justice Ginsburg. At times, there was a standing ovation when she entered the auditorium, and a crowd of admirers that could easily overwhelm her if they were left unchecked by security. Justice Ginsburg would gently wave her arms to motion everyone to sit down, but it could take a minute or two before people could calm down. And people think Taylor Swift is a rock star. I quickly discovered that it was best not to leave my seat during intermission because there was always a line of starstruck fans. Someone would invariably try to take my seat to get her attention, and sometimes they didn't want to leave. Another thing I discovered was that I no longer needed to bring my opera reference book. There was no reason, since she knew so much about opera and was so generous in sharing her knowledge. She would comment on the singers, both past and present, and she'd tell stories about her visits to the opera house as a child and how she and her husband Martin went to the Metropolitan Opera when they were dating. Not surprisingly, a frequent topic of conversation was the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center, which she adored. She attended their dress rehearsals, and she liked to discuss the performances. Her knowledge of opera was remarkable, and it was fascinating to listen to her candid opinions of the productions. She was, just as you would imagine, incredibly well-informed, engaging, thoughtful, and respectful. She was a lovely person, a truly great lady. It's because of our opera connection over the years that I am sure Justice Ginsburg would enjoy the next portion of the program this evening. It is my pleasure to present Victory Brinker, the classical singing sensation who at the age of 7 was named the Guinness World Record's youngest opera singer. She's the winner of numerous contests and prizes and is known for her breakthrough performance on America's Got Talent. Please welcome Victory Brinker.
Another round of applause for that. Wasn't that amazing? Thank you, Victory, and thank you, Ms. Dim, for sharing your special memories of Justice Ginsburg. Continuing now, our next distinguished speaker is Elizabeth Glazer, who serves as the Senior Criminal Justice Policy Advisor to New York City's Mayor Adams. Previously, Ms. Glazer has held a variety of leadership positions at the local, state, and federal levels, including the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. She also clerked for Justice Ginsburg when she was a judge on the U.S. Circuit Court. Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello tonight to Elizabeth Glazer.
Victory? Wow. Fantastic. So it's a funny thing when you know and love someone who becomes an icon and, well, a stamp. Even a stamp as beautiful and as true to her image as this one is in two dimensions. And, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg lived her life fully in three. And I had a front row seat as one of her clerks. They are a blazingly talented group of professors and judges and public servants and more. And they're a piece of her living legacy, inspired by her brilliance, disciplined by her work ethic, and beneficiaries of her million kindnesses. The notes that arrived in the mail, the hard stock court stationery, the fine-lined pen of her precise handwriting and expression. For every occasion, births, deaths, congratulations. Jane Ginsburg, the justice's daughter, and I have been friends since we were 7. In the 1960s and 70s, when Ruth Ginsburg was a law professor and the founder of the ACLU Women's Rights Project, in the Ginsburg's New York apartment, Ruth Ginsburg typically camped out in the dining room that was lined with bookshelves full of her beloved husband Marty's tax reporters. She was fueled, it seemed, entirely by coffee and cigarettes, sometimes pausing when Marty, a renowned tax expert and a renowned cook, would tempt her with a few morsels. She worked long into the night and into the morning, and the result, 6 Supreme Court arguments in 7 years that established some fundamental rights for women and men. If I knew Mrs. Ginsburg one way, I got to know Judge and Justice Ginsburg in quite another. She had liked something I wrote when I was 14, and 15 years later, she called to offer me a job. Life in chambers pulled back the curtain on the law and what had been going on in that dining room lined with tax reporters. We lived an ordered life, if ruled a little bit by the judge's nocturnal habits. As clerks, we made sure that before we left for the day, we had fed the judge enough to last her to morning, bench memos, cases, research. And she would then return to chambers the next morning, unzip a leather case with her neatly written legal pages. She was a committed user of Scotch tape and scissors. And sometimes some of our words or a sentence or miraculously a paragraph would survive carefully taped into the text of an opinion or an article. She opened her mind to us in a way that was heart-stopping and exhilarating. In a discussion with the judge, you stepped into a different world in which the usual social noises, yeah, right, fell away, so all you could hear was the thinking. She did us the great honor of taking us seriously. She disciplined our minds and our work with her own grace and order. And she trained us to be better lawyers and writers by her example and her actions. We learned it is the thickness of life and thought and family all tightly interwoven that gives meaning to our lives, and one doesn't stand without the other. She, of course, went on to the high court, as she always called it, and became notorious. She was a person of paradoxes, reserved yet delighted to be notorious, RBG. I don't believe she got a tattoo, but she sported a notorious RBG tote bag, a startling contrast to her usual elegant accessories. She was very much of the world, and yet entirely apart from pieces of it. Once, we clerks accompanied her to the investiture of a folksy judge who punctuated his remarks with references to Willie Nelson lyrics. This Willie Nelson, she later asked us, I take it he's a baseball player? She changed in a profound way the shape of society's connections, but she had an ingrained modesty, never puffed up. Soon after her confirmation, I ran into her at a party. She had a glass of wine in one hand and a doorstop biography of John Marshall tucked under her arm, as if, were a conversation to fail, at least she'd have something to read. I deftly asked her how that whole high court thing was coming along, and her self-effacing reply was, Lizzie, I am just working my head off to be prepared. She was the general of a revolution, but there was nothing militaristic about her. She was an institutionalist, believing in the power of the democratic structures of American life that had been, despite all she had to overcome, the bedrock of her own successes. What is the difference between a bookkeeper in Brooklyn and a Supreme Court justice? She famously asked. A generation, she just as famously answered. At her death, her clerks formed her honor guard, assembled on the great square in front of the High Court. In the utter silence of that clear September day, her body was borne up the steps to lie in repose, and we stood watch over her in turns through the days and the night. And as in front of the court, thousands, women, men, little children passed by, another living legacy. She would have been, I think, a little surprised by today's honor, but so pleased. The stamp is a fitting tribute to a person who believed deeply in our country and its institutions, and whose pen reshaped our world.
Thank you so much, Ms. Glazer. We have reached the grand finale this evening, and it is a special one. Our final speaker this evening is Clara Sparrow. She is a lawyer. She practices trial and appellate litigation. She focuses her pro bono practice on reproductive rights litigation and advising family law and criminal defense. She is a lecturer at the Harvard Law School, and she just happens to be the granddaughter of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We are delighted this evening to present to you Clara Sparrow.
On behalf of the family of my grandmother, my bubby, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, thank you to the United States Postal Service for this great honor. Both during her life and after her death, my grandmother has been honored with several inspiring and wonderful awards and recognitions. But this one is particularly special because I think it is the first that she shares with Yogi Berra. I'd like to thank those who made today possible, including the Honorable Roman Martinez, Kim Sayat, my grandmother's dear colleague and friend, Chief Justice Roberts, and the two artists responsible for the image that will soon be making its way across the country, Michael Dees, who crafted the portrait based on a photograph by Philip Birmingham. Of the many honors my grandmother has received, this stamp is especially fitting, and not only because the Supreme Court has had occasion to interpret the postal clause found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Indeed, stamps played a large role in my grandmother's life from long before she ever sat on a federal bench. By all accounts, Bubby was an exacting parent who set high academic expectations for her children, as she would later of her clerks and her grandchildren. She was involved in her children's education, wanting to go beyond the already demanding curricula at her children's schools. So, in the 1960s, Bubby used an extensive stamp collection borrowed from her cousin and closest friend, Richard, to teach my mother geography and history. My mother learned about the European colonization of Africa by examining stamps like those from French Togoland, which, by the time my mother was in middle school, had gained independence from France, and she knew only as Togo. My mother learned about the brief independence of nations like Estonia and Latvia, which she knew only as part of the USSR. Bubby was also a regular user of stamps. She had a penchant for sending handwritten snail mail letters. I always looked forward to receiving her birthday cards in the mail. My favorite from my 4th birthday, which featured a drawing of Bubby and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, surrounded by music notes and the lyrics to the happy birthday song. Inside the card, it simply said, "From the Supremes." I have saved all of her cards and the envelopes in which they were sent. Leafing through those envelopes, I discovered stamps of all kinds, including my favorite, a Bugs Bunny stamp from 1997, which, by the way, cost only 32 cents. And Bubby wrote letters her whole life. After her death, I came across a box of letters that Bubby wrote to her soon-to-be mother-in-law during her final year of college at Cornell. The letters provide a fascinating and moving glimpse into a young woman in love and excited to be married and ready to be done with college. Each of the letters I found, which span an entire academic year, bore a 3-cent stamp featuring a profile of the man who drafted the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. I am sure that Bubby would be thrilled beyond words to learn that she will be joining the ranks of founding fathers and others who inspired her, like Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, and Ella Baker, not to mention opera legends Lily Pons and Richard Tucker, all of whom were similarly honored by the United States Postal Service with stamps. Her legacy, like theirs, will forever be stamped into the story of this great nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was amazing. We are now at the conclusion of our ceremony this evening. But before we go, we do have a few thank yous to send out and then some announcements to share. We would like to thank all of our guests and our participants for making tonight such a special occasion. First, Kim Sayat and everyone here at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery for hosting this evening's event and making us feel so welcome. Governor Roman Martinez and the U.S. Postal Service, thank you for choosing this location to celebrate Justice Ginsburg with this incredible honor of this memorial stamp. We thank you as well, too. Chief Justice Roberts, Nita Totenberg, Lori Dim, Elizabeth Glazer, and Clara Sparrow, we thank you as well. Those tributes were amazing this evening. We all enjoyed them. Thank you so much. And we could not gather communally without all of you in the audience. So thank you for taking time out of your all busy schedules to being with us tonight to celebrate Justice Ginsburg. Thank you. We would like to remind that some of our panel will be available to autograph your programs this evening and other keepsakes. We would like you to remember you can buy the Ruth Bader Ginsburg stamp at the Postal Service retail booth located right behind you over there on those lighted signs. There will be cake. So we would like all of you to stick around and have a piece of cake celebrating this momentous occasion this evening. And we would like all of the participants in the program this evening to remain for another photo at the conclusion in just a moment here. I'm Tom Fitzgerald. It has been an honor and a privilege to be your MC for this evening's celebration. It has been truly a wonderful evening celebrating Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Have a good night, everyone.